Good morning or afternoon from whichever time zone you might be joining us in. I'm excited to be kind of moderating today's conversation. I definitely want to keep this interactive, so as you guys have thoughts or questions or any comments, definitely feel free to use your chat window there so we can all make sure to hit your questions. I appreciate everybody who submitted questions beforehand, and Ken will go a little bit more into depth on some of the pre-assessment questions that we received. So with that, let's look at the agenda for today. So we'll be doing some brief introductions from our speakers. I know some of you are probably familiar with some of the logos that we have joining us today, but for those of you who aren't, we'll be doing some introductions, and then we'll jump into a little bit about our pre-assessment review. Typically we do a polling question beforehand, but it was great to receive so many thoughts beforehand that we wanted to incorporate that so we can get a temperature of where everyone is today. We'll then have Susan, who'll kind of review the winning numbers, and we'll have Marcy, who'll be able to jump into our use case, and then pending time, we'll definitely want to leave some time for Q&A there at the end. Our speakers, we have Ken McAfee, who is a product specialist with Marketware. Ken, thanks for being with us today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your role and a little bit about Marketware as well?
Yeah, thanks, Crystal. And so I'm a product specialist here at Marketware, and so I've had the chance to work with lots of different healthcare organizations, big and small, and help them to understand their products and how they can utilize their tools to help increase referrals and grow their business.
Excellent. Thanks, Ken. Joining Ken, we also have Susan Boydell, who some of you might be familiar with. Susan, thanks for being with us. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your role and Barlow and McCarthy as well?
Thank you very much. It's great to be here with you all today. I'm a partner with Barlow McCarthy, and I probably spent the majority of my career doing exactly what I'm going to guess the most of you on the phone have been doing or have just started doing. And so glad to have a chance to just share with you what we see across the country, but at the same time, it's always great to learn from you all as well. So thank you.
Great, and last but certainly not least, we have Marcy Traxler, who is with Amita Health System. Marcy, thanks for being with us. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your role and what you guys have going on at Amita as well?
Hi, I'm the Vice President of Business Development and Service Line Strategy. Our business development teams go out and visit with physicians. We work with all of our service lines, the major ones. Just try to build a referral channel. And I've worked with Barlow and McCarthy before to train our sales team.
Excellent. Just as a kind of precursor to today's conversation, I'm sure we all recall the recent buzz the Powerball caused. Some of you may have even attempted to play, which is totally fine, with people making a mad dash to local gas stations or even driving across state lines in the hopes of turning into an overnight millionaire. For those of you who maybe aren't as familiar with the Powerball, you choose 6 numbers, 5 of which must be chosen from the range of 1 in 69, and are called the main Powerball numbers, and the 6th number must be chosen from the range of 1 to 26. So it's pretty easy to see why picking the winning combination could be difficult. The reason we wanted to talk about referral development is because oftentimes it can maybe feel like maybe we're leaving the combination of numbers up to chance when it comes to some of our referral channels, and finding that right combination can be a tough call to make. I have spent a lot of time talking to, lots of clients here at Marketware as well as prospects, and it's always fun for me to hear what the winning combination is. Is it, 19 issue resolutions later, 27 visits, 62 emails, and 51 marketing flyers later that yields that referral? So we're hoping that today we can help you decipher what that formula actually is and give you some pointers to ensure that you're not leaving your referrals up to chance. With that, I want to turn the time over to Ken to talk a little bit about our pre-assessment review and kind of kick things off. So Ken, thanks for joining us, and I'll turn the time over to you.
Great. Thank you, Crystal. And I know I was one of those who went out and bought 5 or 6 tickets, and I think I only got 1 number right. But I'm glad to be on here with you and happy to review kind of the responses that we got from our pre-assessment review. And so we asked the question is, what's the greatest challenge your organization faces with referrals? And we got some really insightful responses back. Everything from really just a lack of primary care network. Obviously, it's really hard to gain referrals if the majority of your referrals are coming from primary care physicians, and if you don't have a good network of primary care physicians. Also, really just processes behind coordinating those referrals, or not enough representatives, not enough liaisons or feet on the ground to get out to all the doctors, all the locations, all the geographies that you need to get out to. You know, that's something that's very common. I work a lot in some of the states like Montana and Idaho and some of these places where some of these physicians are miles and miles and miles apart. Some of the other responses that we've gotten are really being able to identify where those referrals are coming from, as well as leakage. Where are they not coming from? Where are they going instead? And as well as what do we do in a referral meeting, or what marketing materials are really going to be the most useful? You know, so if you're going out to a physician's office trying to generate referrals, what do I bring? What do I do? What do I say? And then as well as there's been lots of lack of coordination across the different organizations, across the organization as a whole, as far as not having the tools or the data or the information that's available. And so these are the things that we've found that these organizations, lots of organizations that we've worked with, have had problems with when trying to generate referrals. And Susan's going to be talking on some of these details as well. But I also want to share some of the observations that I have as I've had a chance to work with a number of different organizations, kind of like I mentioned before, large health systems, small hospitals, small clinics, everything in between, and really some of the problems and issues that they've ran into. And so we hope to touch on some of these, and so I want to set the table on some of the different aspects that we've found. And really the overall or overwhelming response that we get from most organizations when we go and talk to them at the beginning of our engagement with them is really just the lack of information. Lack of being able to understand physician referrals. And so that might be on the strategy side. That might be on the boots on the grounds as far as who actually can make the visits and coordinate with the physicians. It's really just lack of understanding of what's actually going on and not having the data, whether it's that external claims data that helps you understand where doctors are referring, where they're leaking to, who else are they referring to, or even that internal data. How many referrals have we gotten from Dr. Jones, for example, and just really the lack of being able to understand what's going on. And so there's probably 80 to 85% of the organizations that we talk to, lack of information is the #1 problem that they have when they're trying to generate referrals. And that's kind of the underlying theme of the rest of the observations that I've noticed. There's lots of things that kind of spin off of the lack of having data, which kind of brings me to points 2 and 3 I'm going to wrap in one, and using as example an organization that I met with in it was a rural organization. It wasn't more than a 20-bed hospital, and they were in a rural area. Their population was growing, and so they needed to grow. They wanted to grow, but they really didn't have the information to know how should we grow ourselves. What service lines should we provide? They really wanted to provide some more high acuity type services, but at the same time they didn't know what their population could support or what they could expand profitably and stay in touch. And so we really needed to get them some information that would allow them to understand their market, understand what was going on, and then 2, they really had to utilize that information to say, okay, now that we know, maybe we're going to now provide higher acuity orthopedic surgeries. Well, then the problem didn't become that we didn't provide that information. It was now that how do we get that information out? How do we get referrals from these doctors that are in this area who have never referred these types of patients to us before? Well, one, because we didn't provide it before, but how do we get the population as well as these referring doctors to make sure that they refer their patients to us? And so that's a big piece, is being able to have the understanding and then also being able to have the strategy built around having that information. And then once you have that strategy around what you're going to do and where you're going to go, well, now that information is going to be able to determine the prioritization of how we get there. And so that's kind of a big factor, is being able to say, we have all this information, now can we determine that we're going to go focus on Dr. 1 because he can send us more of these orthopedic referrals, and then Dr. 2 because he's the next probable place to get orthopedic referrals from, then Dr. 3, then Dr. 4, then Dr. 5, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so not just having that information, but also being able to utilize it and disseminate it across multiple departments becomes a huge piece that we see all the time. It's either they don't have information or they have information, an organization has information, but it's so siloed that not everybody can really use the information that they have. A good example of that is a large academic facility that I've worked with. They told me the story of how a number of years ago they did a giant data analysis project. And they, being academics, they probably brought in PhDs and master students and all kinds of things, and they spent probably hundreds of thousands of dollars analyzing their market with hospital association data, external claims data, their own internal data, and they came up with a great strategy of where to go, what to do. But then everybody went back to business as usual and really never did anything with it. And so that's the observation number 2 is having information is critical, but making sure it gets to the boots on the ground, making sure that the liaisons, the representatives, the marketing department really know the prioritization. Hey, if this is the direction we're going, here are the doctors that we need to focus on. Here's why we need to focus on them. This is the messaging that we're going to get across. Hey, if we go talk to this doctor, we're going to explain to him why we're better at orthopedic hip replacements than where they're sending those referrals now, and we know exactly what we're doing. And so those are 3 of the big factors that I've really observed working with lots of organizations. And the next one is really having the information and tools available to measure success, which in this day and age kind of sounds funny. Crystal, if you can go back one real quick. There we go. Is really being able to measure that success. It's kind of funny. We did a poll here before, or the pre-assessment review. We did a poll to see how many organizations had PRM tools that actually allowed them to measure their success. And it came back that about 60% of the respondents didn't have any sort of tool to measure the success. And when I talk to organizations, that number doesn't surprise me. What is surprising is that there's lots of organizations that don't have that tool. And it really reminds me of a friend of mine in high school. He had an old Honda Civic, and that Honda Civic, the gas gauge was broken. So him and I would drive around all the time, and there'd be times that he'd just run out of gas. He wouldn't show up to class because he'd ran out of gas, or he'd stop at the gas station and fill up because he couldn't remember the last time he filled up, and it was just a few days ago they filled up. He only had to fill it up a gallon. And so really not having any sort of tools to measure how well you're doing is like running around with a broken gas gauge like my friend in high school. Really doesn't allow you to know, hey, we've done all these things, we've done all this analyzation, we know who we're focusing on, we know the direction we're going, but we don't know if it's working or not. And so really the next piece comes into play is being able to leverage technology to help tie all these different things together, to measure accountability, to help you understand where those opportunities are, and then also dive into those opportunities and prioritize where we're going and who's going and what's going on. And so there's lots of technology that market where we can provide some of that information, some of those tools that really help organizations collaborate to make sure that everybody's on the same page, everybody's going in the right direction, and we can turn around and measure success. And those have been some of the observations that I've found on top of the responses that we've gotten here. And Susan will really be able to touch on how she's been able, and Barlow and McCarthy has really been able to help lots of organizations overcome some of these other obstacles to referrals. And so I'm gonna turn the time over to Susan and let her go from here.
Thank you, Ken. You actually shared a lot of good things that I would say we see a lot of that while we're out there in the field with you all as well. So I'm going to share with you power tips, and I've got 5 of them. And, of course, I have one power tip at the very, very end, just to fit in with our theme here. But when we get to the tips, here's what I want you to think about, because I'm kind of giving it to you in 2 ways. There's some things for you to look at, but some of it's also for you to kind of assess where you are today and then prioritize, well, what do I need to do to make sure I'm ready for the future? So I thought I'd start with, what do we see out there? What's changing and what's not? And I'm going to guess that if I were to ask you all to poll right now, which I won't, but if I said, is your world different today than it was even 2 years ago? I'm going to guess that the majority of you are going to say, yes, it is. And I bet most of you would say it's much more difficult, especially those that have been in the field for a while. The world is totally different today. And the timing is right And in fact, we have to be able to move that direction to be able to be of value to our organization in the future. So what's changing and what's not? So I'm going to skip right down to number 3 on that list first, because growth is still king. When we talk to everybody, whether it's in leadership, whether it's the folks in the field, whether it's your CEO, it's all about growing the organization. Even though when we think about population health and accountable care organizations and all of that stuff, growth is still king. Because of accountable care and because of population health, so is retention. We hear so much more about, I've got to keep them in network. I had them, I've got to keep them. And imagine what a great opportunity referral development teams play in that piece. So that slides me back up to 1. So growth is still king, but you know what? They still don't quite get physician relations. It's still so much. I bet if I asked a lot of you, how many times you get a leader coming into your office or sending you email or sending you a box of stuff and say, go out and tell them about my blank. And we all know that the world of tell and sell and just problem solving is not going to get us to where we need to be. And so it's going to be our jobs to have to educate our leadership team and those within the hospital about how it works out there in the field. Because if they just want you to tell something, you will never get the results that you need to. It's all about the needs-based world. So that's a huge piece of this, and we own that responsibility in educating our teams and our leaders, et cetera, from the organization perspective. So number 2, it's still there. It's our greatest vulnerability, and I think even Ken touched on it in certain areas too. It's still about focus. You know, we are all of us that do this field work, we are pleasers, and we hate to say no, but we're going to have to learn to do that. And as leaders of referral development teams, we've got to keep our teams extremely focused in the field. Otherwise, you're going to be doing a lot of that telling and selling from number 1, because I'm just going to take stuff out. And what we want to watch for is, think about every time you go in an office, and if they say, so what do you got for me today? That's a tell right there in terms of how they might be seeing you, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. So number 4, so leakage is the answer to physician relations, value, and population health today. So I get a lot of questions, and we get a lot of questions across the world about, okay, so where's referral development going to go and physician relations going to go in the future? Because once everybody, oh, I got my doctors all aligned, I'm done. And we all know, well, it's not quite that simple. And so the whole world of leakage, huge value that physician relations teams play in that piece. Because if I can't keep them within my network, then I lose. And you have huge opportunities, not only in helping to identify that, but helping to make a difference in the field. And it's a new area of focus for teams to really look at, am I reducing leakage? It's a new strategy. It's a new place to look at, well, where all does that happen? So a lot of times we pay attention to the first referral, but what happens after that? Huge opportunity across a lot of organizations. So number 5, this is directly related to the tell and sell. This is needs-based. We continue to have to be able to learn that piece of it. What are the questions that we're asking? This is not about our internal needs. This is about the needs of the physician. And we get to represent the voice of the physician in the market with, from an organization perspective, and own it because you can. The last one, infrastructure seems to be still an ongoing piece of it, because if you're not organized right, you don't have the right infrastructure, you're only going to be so successful. I think Marcy's going to talk about that when she talks through her case study. You'll hear a lot about that piece, so I'll kind of leave those up to her. I also wanted to put out there, I don't know if anyone's seen it, but SHSMD does their annual physician relations benchmark study, and the last one they did was in 2014. And one of my favorite questions that they ask in there is, what are those significant challenges that you think your programs are going to face in the future? So just like Ken mentioned, it's still about data. We're still struggling, and you know what? I think we'll probably struggle for a good long time, because even as data gets better, when I think about claims data and all the different things that we now have access to that maybe, you know, even 5 years ago we didn't have access to, we still want more. And I think that's great because we'll continually challenge and want to make that better. Measuring ROI, it still comes down to this. Leaders say, I think they're doing a good job for me, but I'm not really sure. And so our ability to be able to connect all that field activity and what we learn in the field to actual results in the hospital and for our health systems is still a key piece, and you also recognize that as that's a key part. The third one to me is interesting because it was not on the list, this high up on the list, probably in the last study that I think was probably done in 2012. Access and time with physicians. And this goes back to that number one thing that's changing out there. And this is about the world of telesales. If we don't provide value, we're not going to get time and access with physicians, because office managers alone who are very interested in the productivity of that office aren't going to give it to us. So so we've got to have a reason to have some time to sit down, and we've got to be extremely organized. And I'll talk through and give you some ideas on how to look at that. So those are those big areas that I see happening out there. Okay, so tip number one, rethink your role. For those of you that might have been in this role for a while, I would challenge you to say, when was the last time your job description was done? And if you had to describe your role, which one of these would be the way you would describe your role? And does that match with not only how your leadership describes your role, but what they want you to do and what they need you to do? So if you're more of a physician advocate, that they really need you to grow business, think about how you need to, what you need to do to transition your role to match that growth expert positioning. What needs to change with my internal teams? What needs to change externally when I'm visiting the office? If the office just sees me as a problem solver, what will I need to do different in that office so that they view me in a different way? And that takes straight to relationships with intent. So the foundation to growing business in the field is the relationship. But the relationship alone isn't going to get you the volume you need. It's got to be relationship. I have an intention with this relationship, not just to make you like me, but to make you use me. And so when you look at your relationships, this is that whole piece of tightening up your visit strategy. For those that have been doing it a while, you probably don't need a pre-call plan anymore. I kind of say, let's dust it off. If we really want to challenge ourselves, take some of those key offices. I think about those ones where you kind of go where you're in your comfort zone, and I have that in a slide coming up as well. I go in there, they know me, they love me, I get right back, I have great conversations. But what's really changing and what am I getting for that? And really thinking about how would I change that visit? What would be the key questions that I would want to ask? How would I reposition myself maybe with the physician, with the office staff? Thinking about all of those things. I have on there about sales cycle. Defining your sales cycle is also a great opportunity for even as a team to think about. So what are the steps in the sales cycle that I'm moving through, and how proactive am I moving through those sales cycles? So that's basically how am I advancing the relationship to get the commitment for the referral. So another opportunity to think about that. I put on here, and I kind of said it right up front, take out, how's it going out of your script. I often tell people, if you catch yourself saying it, be aware of it and think about, now how am I going to do this different in the future? So removing those pieces from it. We've already talked about the ask, don't tell. You've got that piece. One of the things you had mentioned in the pre-assessment piece for the webinar here was about what marketing materials do I need. And you'll see my last little point on there that says empty the trunk. This is about getting very strategic about what materials do I need in my hand that are going to advance the relationship? In other words, I'm not just taking something out because some internal person asked me to. I'm taking it because it will help me to advance the relationship. So if you've got a trunk full of marketing materials, clean it out and get very strategic about what you actually really need in the back of that trunk. I've seen a lot of them, and you all are probably laughing because some of you probably have those. So think about that and get very strategic about what's in your trunk and how you use that. Tip number 3, this is that whole piece of the world of ROI. And this is a huge opportunity. So there's everyone has them. We all have reports and we show our numbers and we show all that stuff. I want you to take a step back and think, and actually Ken was doing a little of this when he was talking about what he's learned in the field. It's storytelling. So if I was to take those numbers that are on a piece of paper, and I now want my leaders to understand what really happened with there, and I want to engage them into what the value of what I did in the field and the difference that it made. So not only am I engaging in that, but I'm educating them on how this works in the field. Think about turning those numbers on a piece of paper into a story. And we know the parts of a story. We know all those sections. I gotta set up my baseline. There's going to be some kind of crisis there in the middle, and then I'm going to have something that's going to solve that at the end. Think about each one of those steps. Think about every move you make through your sales cycle. That, again, is why it's so great to define your sales cycle. So if you think about each of those steps in the sales cycle is an opportunity to report something, and it's an opportunity to tell the story. So you don't have to wait until the end of the month when the numbers come out to see whether or not somebody went up. You can tell what happened before that, come back and tell the story again and say, and we got 3 more surgeries because of the activity and the story that you put together. Know who your customer is when you're doing this internally. This is no different than talking to physicians in the field. What's the most important thing to them, and where's my opportunity to educate? Which means I got to simplify it down, and it's got to be meaningful to them. Less is more. So I always joke, I've done this so many times where I show a report that I used to show my leaders at one of the organizations I was at, and oh my God, it had everything in it, all the information in the world, and there were numbers, and it was color-coded and everything, and I used to watch the leaders look at that and glaze over. So less is more. And always think about, am I actually getting to the point that I want them to remember and that I need them to do something about, or that I want them to say, she's making a difference or he's making a difference in the field. Okay, so tip number 4. When was the last time you all looked at your target list? This is that whole data-driven, focused piece. Because if that target list of doctors doesn't make sense, then what you're doing in the field isn't going to make sense. And just like Kim was talking about all of what, MarketWare has to offer and everything, that's all in this space. It's going to get me very targeted to talking to the right doctors about the right things in the field. So when we think about that, I'm going to kind of go over to this part where it's like, can you describe your targeting methodology? Ask yourself that question. If I had to describe to somebody how I came up to my target list of 200 doctors, how did that happen? And does it make sense? So think about that piece. I'm not going to go through the steps of this, and Marcy actually might spend a little time on that piece from her perspective, but I kind of give you the steps to go through. So it's what are my clinical areas, and what's the methodology to define the doctors that are going to help me get to the cardiology volume goal that I need to get to, et cetera. It goes right down to what's my sales plan in the field with those doctors. So I've now got a target list. What am I going to do with them? And that's all connected in this world of targeting. So our last one is about just invigorating talent. This is we're in the field every day in the trenches, out there trying to get behind the gatekeeper. We're trying to get the referrals. It's harder and harder. We got to keep people excited, invigorated, and willing to keep going at it. And so this is an opportunity from an assessment perspective. This is for both you managers that are on the phone, but also you folks in the field. Okay, so what are your strengths and weaknesses? Where do we do well? Where do we seem to stumble? What are the areas that the team has the most difficult time with? And it might be gatekeepers. We hear more and more about the gatekeeper piece. I couldn't tell you how many conversations we have with folks that say, I can't get in unless I bring a lunch. So you got to think about, you can't bring a lunch. How am I going to get in there? What do I need to talk about in order for that piece to happen? And that takes us back to that whole piece of I've got to provide value. I got to get really, really specific about what I'm in there to talk about, and it's got to have meaning to those positions, which means I've asked my questions and I've done the right things to get there. From a manager perspective, coaching is your greatest development tool. I got right on here, get out in the field with your team. Because not only will you learn what it's like every day for them out there, but it then helps you determine what are the tools and the coaching and the pieces that they need so that they can be more comfortable and get more energized about what they have to do every day. Use your documentation tools. If you got MarketWare, use MarketWare to look, are they progressing through the sales cycle? Can I see by reading visit 1, visit 2, visit 3 that things have progressed? Or were there 10 visits and nothing really changed or nothing really progressed? That's a huge opportunity in there because something's stuck. That's in that piece of, am I stuck in my comfort zone? So do I get it? Do I go to the offices that they're easy to get into and talk about the things that I know they'll listen to me, but is it really going to get me to where I need to be? And so thinking about all of those pieces as well. So I'm going to leave you with one power tip, and this is just my passionate side of it. This is about getting refocused, and in all honesty, if you had to reinvent yourself, where would that be? What would that look like? And how would you do it? So I gave you a whole bunch in tip 1 through your first 5 tips there. I gave you tips to kind of give you ideas for, well, where would you look and what would you need to do? You can decide what's those areas of prioritization and what are the things that you need to do. So think about refocus, because you got to have it. And if I was going to reinvent myself, what would that look like? What's my greatest opportunity from an organization perspective, from a results perspective, and from a field perspective?
Great. Thank you so much, Susan, for those Powerball tips, and definitely something that's been great as I've gotten to know Marcy and kind of her story, and she'll definitely jump into the different stages, is a perfect note to end on looking at refocus and reinventing. I know that Amita has absolutely done that, and you know, Marcy is not a newcomer to having to refocus and reinvent, as I know that they had to go in and really set the stage and relook at their structure and titles and organization. So I think that regardless, whatever maturity model or stage that you're in, you'll really be able to relate to, you know, what it's like to kind of have to clean house and re-examine yourself. So excited to have Marcy on as our case study for today. With that, I'll kind of turn the time over to you, Marcy, to kind of share what's worked well for you guys, what your structure looks like to date, and then what has been some of the strengths of your referral program and what keeps you on track from an accountability and measurement standpoint.
Thanks, Crystal, and thank you, Susan, because I could listen to you all day. You are just wonderful, everyone from Barlow and McCarthy. So let's dive into what our structure looks like a little bit, and it may be different from what you might be used to, but under our Chief Strategy Officer, she really saw it as 2 very distinct functions, the physician recruitment and retention, and then really business development as a very separate and distinct function. And I think in many physician liaison programs, at least as they were practiced here at Legacy, Alexian, and now Amita, the liaisons could get pulled in a million different directions and down very many rabbit holes, whether they were solving some kind of billing problem, parking issue, other kind of customer services issue, or actually working with the CEO on maybe some of the outreach to nursing homes or other kinds of community firehouses, things like that, they really could not focus consistently on business development. So when the new Chief Strategy Officer came, she really wanted those two things separated. So you see I have a Director of Business Development and then what we call Physician Service Managers, different than our retention team, and I also have occupational health sales as well. And they are very distinct teams, but I will say we collaborate and we actually have a monthly meeting together. And on very big initiatives, we will most definitely collaborate and divide and conquer the work. And they've been actually great partners to us. So when I talk about my team specifically, I think they're really at the center of a lot of things. We have a service line structure here in AMITA. And each service manager is assigned to a service line, so cardiology, orthopedics, oncology, neurosciences, bariatrics, soon to be GI service line. And I think part of the reason I wanted to do that is it can be very tiring to always be out in the field and sort of be disconnected from the mothership. And one of the things I wanted to do for them is give them the opportunity and possibly a career pathway here at AMITA. So they work with their service line leaders and are expected to meet with them once a month and really translate a lot of what the initiatives are clinically, new specialists, new procedures to the rest of the team. So they are really the point person. And the fun part about it, I think, is that they really run independent projects for their service lines. One of the challenging things, I think, for any business development person is that we really hold them accountable for a breadth of information. I mean, think of it, not only will they have to own their own home service line, but they need to have enough of those tools and talking points to go deep on a lot of different service lines. We also, this year is actually very new. We've worked with our medical group on some primary care help, which is a little bit out of our, comfort zone. We also worked with some of our one-off specialty practices in that they don't have a service line, a fully blown service line, but they might be one component like arthritis or ENT. And then we have worked on special initiatives, which I think, again, gives them an opportunity to kind of stretch and not just be business development, but work collaboratively with our marketing partners, with our community outreach partners on business development plans. And we really moved to a structure where we do a lot of project planning with our service line partners, and I'll get into that a little bit in a second. But as far as looking at and using technology, which I think is really one of the great things, and using the data and turning it into information has been really key for us. I think, again, a business development role is very challenging, and moving, I've had Chris Barlow actually out a couple times to work with our team, and moving people from transaction selling, just I'm the mailman and I'm going to come here and give you a bunch of information, to consultative selling has been probably the biggest challenge for us. I would say on my own team, it's a bell curve. I have a couple people that do it really well. I have a couple people that they're just really having a hard time with it, and then probably everyone else is in the middle. And so one of the changes that we did make this year is, and actually Susan touched on this, is it's kind of a little bit of a pharma route, but our manager goes out on calls every month and spends a day in the field coaching toward consultative selling, and I think it's made a big difference. I think people felt a little uncomfortable with it, but who cares? I mean, I think we're getting the results that we want, because when she hears people say things like, how's it going, she kind of redirects the conversation. So I think people are really learning. When you look at some of the things, one of the things we're trying to move people into is the pre-call planning. What are you going to do on the call, and then post-call wrap-up? And I think MarketWare has been very helpful and very user-friendly in this. We had a different tool before, but I think this is just a lot more visually appealing for the folks in the field. What's up on the screen right now is our BD splitter opportunity by territory. So just from kind of a higher level, a salesperson can look at their assigned territory and sort of know who are the top 10 primary care targets that are leaking business from our health system, and get to know those and start to look a little bit deeper into what is going on. It gives them a great idea of how to spend their time productively by knowing what that dashboard has on it and how they should maybe start to structure their day. And then you can actually get a little bit more granular and look at service lines and what they're splitting, so that you're going into that call and really planning to try to elicit information along where some of the leakage might be occurring. And one of the things I know we learned in Chris Barlow's presentation is really guide that physician along to certain kinds of patients, have them really think of a patient's story and why they might have referred that patient out for whether it was cardiology procedures or some other kind of procedure. But the BD splitter opportunity is something that we've just been rolling out to have everyone get a good grasp of what their market looks like. And then the physician view, which is probably the more typical view that they would look at in terms of the pre-call planning. What is going on in this particular physician? What's his payer mix? How old are they? Because oftentimes for our medical group, we do try to suss out folks that are maybe going into a pre-retirement stage, and they might be a target for acquisition. They might be a target for some succession planning. So we look at those things. And so we want them to look at this physician view and start to get to know the book of business by physician. Find out, dig a little bit deeper into where are their referrals going, so that they're having a more meaningful conversation with that physician. We want to know about their loyalty and their preferences along service lines and why they might be reaching out. And you know what I've said many times to our team is, look, the physicians sometimes know what they know, but they don't know what they don't know. And I think this came up recently when we were doing some business development around surgical business, and many of our primary care physicians who've been here a long time and actually had relationships with surgeons that do minimally invasive or robotic surgery had no idea that we did that. So you have to have those probing conversations, because, you know, we only can look at them and know what we know from what they know, but there's a world of stuff out there that we don't know, and we really have to work at uncovering those opportunities. The physician specialty connection is really to help us get more granular in regards to their specialty preferences and uncover those opportunities. We actually did a very big project this fall around cardiology, and again, this is a partnership with the service lines where everybody's really working together. We brought 2 cardiology groups together, and there's lots of other independent cardiology groups. So we started by working with the service lines to look at where the primary care physicians in certain zip codes were actually sending their cardiology. We also sent out a survey monkey to existing cardiology practice physicians to find out, you know, their service level, why they might be sending out, those kinds of things. So we had the survey, we had the leakage data, the specialty connection data, and where people were going. And then we did really targeted, focused attempts to get appointments. And we also worked with the cardiology groups to actually bring physicians and the service line leader to have a really robust conversation with these physician groups. And we did try not to bring lunch most of the time, I will say that, and really talk about cardiology, what their needs were, what were their gaps, that they felt the service levels. And not only did we get information about their referral, and I think we're able to turn some referrals, but I also think we got some valuable information about their patients' experience of our hospitals related to cardiology that we then forwarded out to operations. So it was really just a great experience to take the data and make it information, and then meet with the doctors, and then start to see results. So it really was a very powerful tool. So how do I measure results in my team? And I think there's, you know, I think everybody wants to have a certain visit number in their mind, and I really say to the team, I'm really more interested, you know, you could have 100 visits and get nothing done, or you can have really good, profound visits. We actually lowered our visit threshold this year to 20 a week, and 9 of those we really do ask that they are with the physician, or if it's a larger office, the physician referral coordinator. we've gone through a lot of different iterations, but we do look at, when we're looking at did we have an effect with business, we actually turn to our internal data. So we know that the physicians that used or that we have targeted, we go back and we look into NextGen and Atheta from our medical group where most of our specialists are employed, and then we match those up and then see did we get a referral increase. We also look at change of performance data through our service line reporting. You know, what was the book of business before we started the project in, let's say, interventional cardiology, and what is it after that? So we try to get as precise as we can, and then the salespeople are actually that's how they get their bonus. I mean, did their service line grow? Was there impact? Did we get more TAVRs? Did we get more Gamma Knife? You know, that kind of thing from the targeted physicians that we looked at. And then we do look at our leakage reports by service line. You know, it's not that we don't do that. We try to see how are we moving referrals through our market where service line leakage. We also have an outpatient summary group where we've been able to look at what is the diagnostic imaging by physician and be able to reward people that way as well. And then how well have they worked with their service line leader? We do, because they are so integral to the service line, every quarter I have their service line leader do an assessment. You know, are they adding value to your service line? Are they, executing on the project plan for growth for this quarter? And all those things go into our 90-day check-ins, and which I started this year as well, and just making sure everyone stays on track. So it is complex. I really feel that it's a hard job, and to keep it fresh and to keep it interesting and to keep a career path in mind for people, because I don't think they're going to stay with me forever. And I do worry and want to make sure that they're exposed to a lot of different things in the health system to help them grow their career path. So that kind of wraps it up for me, and I think I'll turn it back over to Crystal.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely, Marcy, and lots of great takeaways. You know, I love hearing your story from, someone who's actually out there applying a lot of the things that, Susan was able to kind of tee up and talk about with your team. And so excited to see you guys continue to succeed and grow and kind of find things that work and offboard those things that don't. I think you definitely hit it on the nail on the head in saying that, the importance of keeping it fresh and reevaluating and making sure that you're not just doing what you've always done, but that you're making sure that you're continuously kind of getting results on those things. I was talking to a hospital organization, and one of my favorite lines that director of business development said is, what made you successful yesterday and last year won't necessarily make you successful next year. And that comes back to the fact that the industry is changing. Your market is a live and breathing ecosystem. And so going back to those things is definitely important. Just that kind of tee off our Q&A here, so definitely I see that we're getting some great questions coming in, but I wanted to touch on the point of stakeholder engagement, and I'll kind of start with you, Marcy, but what has been something that's been successful when it comes to stakeholder engagement and stakeholder buy-in when you are looking to make the organizational changes that you made? What worked well for you, or when you're looking at bringing on, technology, how do you have that conversation with executives?
I think it's a great question, because I think sometimes the expectations for data, we have many sources of data, and I think a lot of it has been educating folks about what the data means. I think that was probably the biggest struggle in any of this claims data and things like that. You're getting connection strength, so it's not a dollar for dollar relationship, and I think a lot of what we did is really always even in our reporting or anything that we do is provide that context of what the numbers mean, and that I think that has probably been the biggest challenge around around, everyone understands the PRM part, but I think when you start getting into the claims data and leakage reports, there are inferences, and people just need to know what those inferences mean, and always kind of bringing those definitions back up whenever we're reporting data.
Okay, excellent. No, I think that's a great point there. Just a quick question for Ken that came in is, what are some of the data sources that are kind of used by MarketWare to quantify and update leakage by physician? Kind of a two-part question is in terms of the refreshness of that data that's ongoing and kind of acquisition costs. Any light that you can shed on that, Ken?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of different data sources that we can bring in. One, obviously, especially if we're looking at the external data and the leakage, would be that external data. And so we'd want to take a look at that, and that's coming from insurance claims clearinghouses and the relationships that we have with them in order to get that data, so we then can see who is doing procedures where, who they're referring those patients to, and what those relationships look like. And so that's how we get some of that information, as well as we can also tie into, and I guess I use that term loosely, tie into, but we can get information from your internal EMR sources as well to compare back and forth and to take a look at those. And so if we're getting information from your internal systems, we typically are pulling that in on a monthly basis, but for some of our clients, we're pulling that in on a bi-monthly, a weekly, even a daily basis is how accurately and how often we can pull some of that data in, compared to on typically about a quarterly basis is what that external data gets refreshed as. And and then to answer kind of the pricing or shedding any light on that side, it really kind of ranges and kind of is all over the board there, so I can't give a whole lot without knowing some parameters there as well. So I hope that some of that information is useful as far as being able to look at that leakage information, and data sources that we're tying in for can come from multiple different sources, but typically that external data from insurance claims clearinghouses as well as your internal systems, and looking at the two back and forth.
Great, and maybe, Ken, just to kind of help and dovetail off of that, the question of, I guess, the range of clients that we do have, as we kind of had a question around, pricing in specific, can you kind of give an idea of maybe the range of kind of sizes those people are trying to debate whether or not it makes sense to bring on technology or things like that? Yeah,
so a good example of some of the different clients that we work with, and we work with them on a wide variety of levels, whether it's including data or whether it's just on the PRM side. But we have organizations, like I mentioned before, a small critical access or semi-critical access organization or hospital with less than 20 beds, as well as orthopedic, I'm trying to remember the exact count, but there's an orthopedic organization, a clinic that has 4 or 5 doctors, up to healthcare systems that have 60, 70 plus hospitals. And so it really kind of ranges as far as the flexibility, as far as what can be used, who can use what, and even the price point can be correlated to the amount of information that you want to bring in, and so it can be affordable for small organizations as well as large organizations.
Great, thanks, Ken. And then just a question for you, Susan. As you're looking at the maturity stages of your organization, how do you know what's kind of the breaking point of saying, okay, we need to add another physician liaison, or we need to, how do you know and kind of gear what maturity process you're in when you're looking at, is it time to make an acquisition? What does that kind of look like as folks are looking to maybe grow or expand and kind of formalize their processes?
I think so much of that comes back to that whole targeting process, because there's a methodology to that. And there's a certain number of physicians that someone in the field can handle. And so if you've got a tight targeting process that tells you how many physicians are going to be good opportunities to grow the business that you want to grow, then that kind of tells you how many resources you need. I'm going to guess that the majority of the time we need more resources than we have budget for. So then it becomes a real game about prioritization. and determining that piece. A lot of times when organizations don't get all the resources up front, especially if it's a newer program or they're getting leadership on board with what the opportunity might be, then results drive the next part of it. So if you can show results, that's the way that you get more resources, because you've been able to show an ROI for it. So it's kind of a combination of both of those. So get what you can get, and use a nice data-driven methodology to tell you why you need the number of resources you need and what they're going to be doing and where they're going to be and what they're going to be focused on, and then let your results tell you when you need more, because there's always an area that we're not touching that we know we could get some business from. So I hope that answers your question.
No, great. Thank you. And I know we're getting here close to the top of the hour. We definitely appreciate your questions and thoughts that came through. Big thanks to Marcy and Susan and Ken for your insights today. Lots of good takeaways, I think, for you know, regardless of where you are in your processes and what maturity you are kind of in your organization as a whole. But definitely want to give everybody a huge thank you, and to those of you that were able to tune in today, thanks for taking time out of your day to join us and share a little bit more about how we can help you, you know, streamline those referrals and become a lot more predictable in your processes. Have a great rest of your work week. I definitely look forward to hearing any survey results that you have or feedback. Feel free to go to marketword.com and reach out to us if you've got any other specific questions around our technology or application there. Thanks for joining us.